Okay, we are live on Facebook, North Bend Television, of course, the webinar. The meeting is yours, Mr. Fusco.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmer. All right, I call this Finance Committee meeting to order, and we're going to begin the evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, moving along. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the March 16th, 2021 Special Finance Committee meeting?
So moved.
All right, I see a motion by Mrs. Stoll, seconded by Mr. Resch. All those in favor, please say aye, raise your hand. Great, motion carries. All right, Mr. Scott, we have a rather full agenda this evening. Please tell me how you want to approach.
Thank you, Mr. Fusco.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I skipped public comment. My mistake. Hold on.
I was just going to say that.
Again, I'm in a big rush here to get to this agenda. I apologize. Mr. Gilmer, do we have anyone in attendance who wants to address the committee this evening?
We do. We'll start off with Mr. Lanier. Mr. Lanier, I've enabled your microphone. So when you're ready to begin, you can unmute your microphone, state your name and address, and begin your comments, please.
Yes, my name is Jason Lanier. I'm at 100 Oak Drive in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. I'm calling in regarding actually the slow roll that we have for opening up the schools with respect to COVID and all of the problems that we've encountered in terms of opening up more quickly. Just to reiterate some salient facts, which I don't understand why the board hasn't addressed this with whomever they need to address this with, either the county or the state, but realizing that in the state of Pennsylvania, there has been 0 fatalities for kids 0 to 17. You can go the next age group up and still 0 fatalities. Yet we are doing this slow roll opening. Touching on some additional information, there's a lot of hesitation about we need to do a lot of testing for kids, especially in high school. All of the studies I've read have shown that kids are not vectors of transmission for coronavirus, meaning their immunity, their T-cell built-in immunity is able to knock out the virus in record time, where they show very little ability to transmit a virus threshold which would infect somebody. And I'm aware that the board may not be aware of any of this. I'm aware that maybe Dr. Dietrich is not aware of this, but somebody needs to be aware of this when they're talking with the county. Why are we implementing things that are unnecessary to the kids? The whole point on the board, aside from approving certain curriculum and or trying to get more money from the state, should be to serve their jurisdiction or their constituency rather of the parents and the kids that are trying to get back into school at 100%, not the slow open, not the virtual, but in-person education. And there's all the data points in the fact that we should, as a district, be opened up at 100%, none of this online stuff. Because I got to tell you, I mean, although some teachers are better at it than others, overall, I think the online performance is not so hot with North Penn School District. And I think this kind of dovetails with one of the problems that you guys have been seeing a lot, which is the migration to cyber charter school. Cyber charter schools have been doing this for some while. So whether they are as proficient in their education or they're missing out on certain aspects, or we have to cover certain parts of special education financially that isn't directly being handled by the cyber charter schools. The problem is North Penn cyber charter is not satisfactory. It is not a good model by which to educate children. Thank you.
Mr. Gilmer, is there anyone else who wishes to address the board, the committee?
Yes, we have Mr. Patchell. And Mr. Patchell, you are enabled. So when you're ready to begin, state your name and address and begin your comments.
Yes, my name is William Patchell. I live at 404 Bonnie Lane.
in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. It's really Montgomery Township, but I'll put another plug on. I think Montgomery Township is probably the most effective, sustainable tax. Everybody wants to live here. Unfortunately, they probably can't afford to move here because it is very expensive. To the last person that spoke before the board, this COVID is just working its way down to younger children. They're starting to get it. You will see that the staff was totally ineffective. And now here we are, just in the beginning of April, 34, 35, 40. I can't wait to see. I went to the dashboard. It's 4 days behind. I can't wait to see what the statistical information. Let me tell you, what's going to happen here is we're not even beginning to this, because in a global basis, the whole world has got to be cured. You are not going to live in a bubble. You won't be able to go to Europe. Africa is raging. South America is raging. The variants are trying to figure out. I believe they've already created a problem with the Pfizer. So this is a long way from being. I tell these young people, you're going to be online. Learn to get good at it, because college, yes, I see up in Michigan, my goodness, they have to lock down again. We didn't get there yet, but I'll tell you what, as the clock ticks off, you'll be shut down again. It's hard to believe. I think the people that lived in Germany in 1944 wish they had never started a war, because we're getting bombed day and night. It does get very tiring. I tell all these young students, you know what? You're never going to go back to March 12th. These parents, someone's going to have to give up their job, because somebody's going to have to stay there and watch their child do online, because Drexel online, a job online. These businesses are saving a fortune. Why aren't these restaurants open? I see Chick-fil-A, they're waiting an hour for a chicken sandwich. Oh no, we don't want to have that restaurant open. We feel very confident about making people wait. So the best students, and I told Dr. Bauer yesterday, the top 50 students, they could care less if they ever went back to the high school. And when next year starts, class of 22, you're going to be really surprised how many students have left this district. And for finances, you are going to be so beset on budgetary problems. I can't wait to appear before this board and say very slowly, I told you so. No one cares about you. The state, no one. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mr. Patchell. Is there anyone else in the audience of citizens who would like to?
Yes, we have Mr. Wilcox, and thank you, Owen, for re-raising your hand there. I accidentally lowered your hand, so I was going to be going to you anyway, but your mic is enabled, so when you're ready to begin, you can unmute, state your name and address, and begin your comments.
Hello, Owen Wilcox, 32 East School Street. I was going to wait till the second public comment to comment, but I figured I'd jump in here. So I see a lot of reports, particularly about the budget, upcoming year, potential tax increases. Also, another presentation on the federal funds that have been received thus far. So I guess I was just curious, and perhaps I'll learn about it in the course of the presentations tonight. But the budget presentation mentioned approximately $11 million deficit, and with all these COVID stimulus and relief packages and all the funding that came from there, I guess I was just curious how we could potentially still be facing such a drastic budget deficit. I realize that there's limits to what you can spend these funds on, but again, maybe you'll cover it. If not, I'm curious to know. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. I do think that your question will probably be somewhat addressed at some point, and you're accurate that it is very targeted what that money can be spent on. It has to be directly related to issues supporting reopening for COVID. Any other hands?
That is it for public comment. No more other hands are up. So we will have our second public comment, I believe, at the end of this meeting.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Skoraki. How are we doing the agenda this evening?
Okay, Mr. Fusco, good evening. Good evening to the Finance Committee. Hope you're doing well. We do have another busy night tonight. We have 3 items for action meeting, and we have 7 items that are informational in nature. So last month we talked about having your fuzzy slippers on and popcorn. I think tonight's going to be round 2 of that. And not to be outdone, next week we have on Wednesday a special Finance Committee where we will devote the entire meeting to a deeper presentation about the 21-22 budget. But first up tonight, we have a presentation from Ms. Margie Scott, who's going to be talking about the extended care program, in particular the camp rates and the tuition rates for the 21-22 school year. So welcome, Margie.
All right, thank you so much for giving me the time to come and speak to you. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the program as a review. The Extended School Care Program operates at all 13 of our elementary schools as a licensed child care program. We offer 2 to 5 days for morning care, afternoon care, or both to families in the district. This year, we also offered the hybrid option for families who came back on the hybrid schedule. Full day care is normally offered on in-service days, although this year we were not able to offer that. Additional mornings and afternoons can also be purchased by families as needed if they're in the program. And then just a bit about the state requirements that we have to follow for licensing. There is a ratio of 1 to 12 for kindergarten through 3rd, and that would be staff to students. And for 4th through 6th graders, if you just have 4th through 6th graders, you can follow a ratio of 1 to 15. We need to provide 40 square feet per child in the facility. There have to be at least 2 staff members at all times, and that would be a site director and an assistant at a minimum. No more than 50% of your staff team can be an aide, which means somebody with a high school diploma and really no experience. And then you do need to add a group supervisor or another degreed person once you get to 45 children or more at one of the programs. So we wanted to talk about where we are at this point due to the pandemic. It has had a great effect on our program. Before the closure of schools, we had an enrollment of 839 students. Currently, we have an enrollment of 317 students. Once schools were shut down due to Act 13 in March of 2020, we were required to pay our staff team for the rest of the school year. And then this year, we've had additional expense with the Friday early dismissals that we need to pay our staff team for, and we have been able to provide additional care to the families on Fridays. Okay, so last February, we had $956,000 between our profit and our fund balance. And this February, at the end of February, we are at a loss of $720,000. So as a result of that, tonight, we're recommending that we have a 5% increase over our current prices for next year for the Extended School Care Program. And we are also recommending that we set camp prices at $245 a week. We are planning to offer 1 location of summer camp this summer, and the reduced price is based on the fact that we will be staying put and there will be no trips or swimming, although we will do our best to provide a wide variety of activities. We will also be following the social distancing and pandemic guidelines of the CDC, and we continue to do that at our program as well.
If I could just add also for the Finance Committee, we alluded to this at a prior month. Because of the negative equity that's now in the Extended Care Fund. Keep in mind now, this is not funded by tax dollars. This is one of our 3 enterprise funds. These funds are treated like a separate private business, although there are still regulations that need to be complied with. but right now there's a negative fund balance of $720,000 total. And we expect that to continue to grow by roughly $100,000 each month for the rest of the fiscal year. So we're anticipating a negative fund balance at the end of the fiscal year, somewhere between $1 million and $1.25 million. So what we are recommending for consideration is that there be a transfer from the general fund to the extended care fund, because right now they're out of money. Transfer money to the extended care fund to get them back to a point where they at least have some equity, with the understanding that that needs to be repaid back to the general fund at some date in the future. Now, you might remember the last 3 years, the extended care program has actually contributed $50,000 a year to the general fund. And as Margie mentioned, their balance was very, very healthy prior to the pandemic. You can see it on the far left on this chart now, almost $1 million in total equity before the pandemic. So, almost a $1.7 million swing in a mere 13 months due to the pandemic. It's staggering. But financially, we need to get the extended care program back to a position where they can pay their bills. And to do that, it would be a lifeline, so to speak, a temporary lifeline from the general fund. And the way the accounting for that works, it's no different than what we do when we move money to the capital reserve fund. It would show as an expense in the general fund, and the money would be physically moved from the general fund account to the extended care account, which would allow the extended care program then to pay its bills moving forward. And then the extended care program would need to pay back that money to the general fund, once they're able to establish some level of normalcy and nice net income like they have the last several years. That money then in future years will be repaid back to the school district general fund. So tonight, what we're asking is to move to Thursday's action meeting the camp rates for the summer and also the tuition rates for 21-22, which include a 5% increase.
I see Mr. Resch has a question.
I see that we're gonna raise what you're asking to raise 5%. The Act 1 index is going up by 3% this year.
Mr. Resch, Mr. Resch, I'm sorry, your audio, Mr. Resch.
Puts 2% on top of the Act 1 index.
Mr. Resch. Mr. Resch, can you turn your camera off and ask the question? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Is it bad?
It was pretty bad. It's better with your
Hold on.
camera off. So go ahead and finish your question, please. Or actually restart your question. I don't think we caught much of it.
Mr. Siraki, I see that the Act 1 index is 3%. You're asking for 5% raise. Is that extra 2% to pay off the deficit that we raised? Or what else would that be for, if it's not to pay off the deficit?
We're recommending an increase in the extended care fund higher than the Act 1 index to help get that program back on financial footing. We felt that at 3% simply wouldn't be enough. Margie did share, and we have the documents posted in board docs. The North Penn Extended Care Program rates are still very, very competitive relative to other organizations in our area. In fact, they're very cheap compared to organizations in our area. We feel the 5% is a good balance between, what individuals can afford and a goal of trying to get some financial footing back with this program.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mrs. Ramich.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And yes, even with the increase, I think that this program is still an incredible value. My family benefited from the extended school program, and I'm really grateful for that. I am wondering, with the influx of funding through the American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act that was specifically designated for child care centers, has that been reflected in these figures and in this budget, or is that anticipated funding down the road? And then my second question is, just because I've been participating in so many conversations about returning to work, right? So I think that a lot of the parents who took advantage of this program and prior to March of last year were commuting and working full time, and now maybe teleworking and maybe planning to return to work and may need some flexibility. And I'm just wondering if there has been a survey of those parents, because I do think that this deficit is temporary, so long as parents are still remaining in a telework situation. So wanting just to know if you've been able to reach out to some of those parents, and then if there are efforts for marketing and promoting the program, if you could keep us posted so that we can help support that.
Okay, so we actually are planning to have registration beginning for the in-house families first at the beginning of May, and then we will continue to hold that mid-month in May for the families who will be coming back to us. We hear from many of them regularly. They're calling to ask when registration will begin, so I think that will be the best test of who's looking to come back in the fall. We purposely held off on having registration so that we didn't get an influx of people who weren't sure about what they were doing. We wanted to wait till closer to the end of the school year so we could get a better read on who was really going to sign up. And then I think we can make plans from there. As far as the funding, we are hoping to get, and I think Kristen Johnson will talk about that later in the meeting, we're hoping to get another $120,000. That funding applications are open until April 21st. We have received some funding, but as others have mentioned tonight, we actually had to return a lot of it because we weren't able to use it for in the manner that it was awarded for.
Okay, thank you. I see Ms. Wesley has her hand up as well.
Thanks, Mr. Fusco. Mr. Scrocky, maybe Mrs. Ramage's question is my question, but the monies that we receive from the state and the federal government for COVID, I think it ends up being about, I think we said 17 million. Can that money be used to pay this 5%?
For the tuition increase, the 5% tuition increase?
Yes.
I don't believe that qualifies under anything that is stipulated as part of the 3 rounds of the ESSER funding.
Okay.
That would be pretty much, that would be a parent stipend at that point in time, the equivalent of a parent stipend. I don't believe that falls into the eligible criteria.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I see no other hands. Well, I do, but I think probably they haven't been lowered. I was curious, between the 3% and the 5%, do you know offhand just how much more total increase that is? If you don't have that data readily available, then I can follow up at another time.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, if the 5% off the largest fee, which is $436 a month for morning and afternoon care 5 days a week, that would go up $22. So 3% is $13.
13, and then it's how many anticipated students?
I suspect we're going to get about 600. I don't think everyone's going to come back, but we're looking at about 600 or 650.
That is rather modest. I was asking out of curiosity on whether or not we might even float a couple extra dollars to help subsidize that extra 2%, but that doesn't seem so unreasonable. I'm not sure anyone else is interested in that or not. Just floating an idea.
And what we plan on doing as well in the month of probably June, because Ms. Scott isn't presenting her full budget tonight. We wanted to wait and see what the early registrations look like before we actually have the budget. It's like a chicken or egg situation here. You need to know the tuition rates to do the registration, but we're in a situation with such an anomaly this year. We kind of need the registration information to really come up with a good budget document that the board can consider. So we're anticipating presenting the actual budget for 21-22 at the June Finance Committee meeting. And we'll have a better idea at that point in time what we're actually looking at for next year, if it's even possible to break even or not next year.
Okay, thank you. It is quite unfortunate what COVID has done to the extended care program budget. It was quite a point of pride, the budget that Margie, you had presented in years past, and your financial stewardship of it. And of course, there's been just so many replications from COVID that there's a lot of support here to get that program back and financially stabilized. And I'm sure you are the right person to get us there once we navigate through this.
I believe Mr. McBain has a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Scrocky. Mr. Fusco, I apologize. Yeah, Mr. Scrocky answered my question before I could ask it about the details that are coming. This is an important program that helps our families get their kids well taken care of so that they can get to work. And I think that it's so important to offer families a valuable and reliable source of childcare. And I'll certainly support this and anything else we can do to help this program get back on its feet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McBain.
So Mr. Fusco, just to summarize again what we're asking for placement on Thursday night's action meeting for the 21-22 tuition rates and for the summer camp rates for the extended care program, with the budget to be presented at a later date.
So can I get a motion to move this to action? Motion by Mr. McBain, seconded by Mrs. Ramich. Any other thoughts or questions? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you,
Mr. Scott.
everyone. We have two other items that are recommended for action meetings. So if we could address those, they won't take too long because I know Dr. Santoro is ready for her presentation. But next item we have for Thursday night's action meeting would be the budget transfers for March. They totaled $1,647,604.53. And the vast majority of those transfers stem from the movement of the federal stimulus money. We had a placeholder in budgetary reserve for federal stimulus money. And as we spend that in a particular area, we move the money from budgetary reserve to the actual expenditure line item. So that's the vast majority of the March budget transfers. And we'd like to have that approved Thursday night, please.
Can I get a motion? Motion by Mr. McBain, seconded by, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my computer, but everybody's camera's off. Mr. Resch. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you. The last item for action meeting is the Delta Dental Administrative Contract. We are self-funded for our dental coverage, just like we are our medical and prescription and vision. It's all self-funded. So Delta Dental, we basically tap into their network of dentists and we pay them to process the claims for the dental claims. So in order to do that, they do receive a fee. It's currently $3.99 per employee per month. Again, that's to pay claims and to tap into their network with discounts. And they are proposing a renewal contract for the same amount. They actually proposed much higher. We were able to negotiate a no fee increase for a 2-year period. So we'd like to have this contract on Thursday night's agenda as well.
I have a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Wanda Lewis Campbell, seconded by Mr. Resch. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to informational items. We have our second to last department level budget presentation tonight. We have Dr. Santoro tonight, and next Wednesday we'll have Dr. Landis to talk about technology. But tonight, Dr. Santoro is going to be talking about the elementary education department budget. So Dr. Santoro, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Are you hearing Dr. Santoro, everybody?
No, she is unmuted, but I don't
Yeah,
hear her.
she's not speaking yet.
Dr. Santoro, do you want to try logging out and coming back in? Okay, we'll move. Mr. Fusco, can we move to the next item while Dr.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Let's keep it moving.
Okay, next item under information is the healthcare premium holiday. Let me explain what the premium holiday is. You all know that we are a member of the CPAST Healthcare Insurance Consortium. This is for our medical and prescription coverage. And we've had a few good years now. You might recall from a previous finance meeting, maybe last month or the previous month, where we talked about our rates for next year were going to be the same for the fourth straight year, which is pretty unheard of when you're talking about medical and prescription coverage. So we are self-insured, but the actuary develops what's called pseudo rates. This is basically what we need to pay into the CPAST fund each year based on our employees and the level of coverage and the plan that they have. Well, because we've had such, tremendous, I don't know if it's skill or luck the past couple of years, we've been able to build up a healthy reserve with CPAST, about a 7-month reserve with CPAST over the last couple of years. And per the CPAST policy, once you build up a certain level of reserve, you are actually eligible for what's called a premium holiday, meaning that you get to pick a month and you don't have to make a payment. You basically draw down your reserves because they're at such a level, you don't need to make a payment. And it's important to note that when payments are made on a monthly basis to CPAST, 83% of that is employer money and 17% of that is employee money. So employees contribute 17% of the core plan, and we as the employer pay 83%. If an employee buys up to a higher level of coverage, they have to pay the difference. So they might actually be paying more than 17% depending on the plan that they're on. If they choose to buy up plan, they pay actually close to 20% of the total premium. So because of our balance, we submitted a formal application to the CPAST Board of Trustees. And actually just about 3.5 hours ago, that board did approve a premium holiday for North Penn for the 21-22 fiscal year, which means that in August, we won't have to make our monthly payment. And our monthly payment is typically been around $2.3 million. So again, part of that is school district money, part of that is employee money. So, and part of that also includes our enterprise funds like the extended care program and the school nutrition services fund. But for the general fund, what this means is that it's almost $1.7 million in the general fund for the 21-22 school year that won't be spent because we won't be making that transfer. So it's not like the money is totally saved. It will just draw down our CPAST balance, but it does provide relief in the general fund budget for the 21-22 school year. So later on tonight, when I give a brief budget update, that $1.7 million has been reduced from the overall spending plan for next year since that CPAST premium holiday has now been approved. And we did let both of our associations know about this premium holiday within the past week. So we're excited to communicate the news to everyone. We're actually in preparation right now to conduct our annual open enrollment. That's going to be opening up in about 14 days to our employees. And the rates that the employees will see will be reflective of this 1-month premium holiday.
Great. Any questions from the committee?
Okay, thank you. Dr. Santoro, how are you making out? Oh, no.
Yeah, I
We can see
think,
your mouth moving, but we can't hear you.
yeah, I had said if you can just scroll down there, you can switch to phone so you can call in with your audio, Betty.
Mr. Fusco, I can probably do another quick one while we're.
Why don't you go ahead, because I know we have a full agenda, so time is precious tonight.
Okay, so let me move on to item D under the informational items. These are the discussion about the 21-22 real estate tax installment payments. You might recall last year, the board authorized changing the number of real estate tax installments from 3 installments we had for a number of years up to 6. That was part of a 3-pronged approach last year to help provide relief for those individuals that may have been economically impacted by the COVID pandemic. You know, that 3-pronged approach last year was to increase installments from 3 to 6, to reduce the penalty period in November and December from 10% to 5%, and also the tax rebate and rent, property tax, rent and property owner rebate was increased from 30% to 50%. That was the third leg of the stool. So for tonight, for your consideration, I wanted to have a discussion with the committee regarding continuation of the 6 installments. It's important to note that we actually saw a 57% increase in the number of property owners that utilized installments over this past year. So I mentioned before, the 3 installment plan that we had before really didn't benefit property owners because they had to make their 3rd installment by the end of the base period anyway. So it was almost like they're paying 2/3 of their money before they really needed to. With the 6 installment program, it really is a true installment program where the property owner pays the 1st installment by the end of July, the 2nd one by the end of August, and so on. The 6th installment is due by December 15th, just to make sure there's no issue with a bounce check. So with a 57% increase, clearly our property owners appreciated that option that the board provided. And we would like to have discussion about continuation of that program for the 21-22 year. So that's one part. The second part then that really dovetails into it would be a discussion about the penalty again. Would the committee consider recommending a reduction of the penalty again from 10% to 5% for a 2nd year? I think they were well received by the community. People took advantage of the program. And I think it's a worthy cause, you know, especially considering the level of unemployment that still exists in the community. Perhaps continuation for at least 1 more year might be worthy.
I'll start just simply by saying, yeah, I would imagine, I mean, I'm fortunate enough that my taxes are escrowed, but it would seem to me I would much prefer to be able to do it on a monthly installment basis than to have 3-month larger payments to have to plan around. And yeah, you're right about the 2/3 being paid before anyone even has to make the payment is unfortunate as well. You know, to be honest, of all things, I'd kind of like to hear maybe in public comment Mr. Patchell's thoughts on this one, because I know he talks to a lot of community members and has his concerns with our property tax system. But I am absolutely in favor of extending it for another year if it's going to make the burden a little bit easier on those who have to carry it. Then I certainly have no objection to doing that. I think I saw Mrs. Stoll, your hands first.
Yeah, thanks. I know the raised hand same color as my wall, so it's hard to see. But yeah, so I was wondering, I concur. I think that I'm in favor of continuing the 6 installments and the reduced penalty. Do we know, did the level of delinquent taxpayers, did that stay steady? Did it go up? Did it go down? Or what happened there? Do we know?
Great question. In fact, Ms. Johnson and I just had a meeting with our elected tax collectors last night. We talked about this. It's amazing considering what happened with the economy last year. The number of delinquent properties that were turned over at the end of the year was actually a little bit lower than it was the previous year. But we saw no increase in delinquencies over the past year, which is great news. And, some people argue that payment of real estate taxes is really not, there's not a strong correlation with the economy, that people pay real estate taxes regardless of economic conditions. So even considering the high levels of unemployment, much higher than we have now, but when the pandemic hit, people were still able to pay the real estate taxes last year. And, to a large degree, again, keep in mind that perhaps some of these programs that the board offered had an impact on that. I know the efforts of the board and the efforts of our tax collector, that's where I think you see more of a direct correlation with real estate tax payment than you do the economy necessarily. But the good news, Mrs. Stoll, to answer your questions, we did not see an increase in delinquency. In fact, we saw a decrease in delinquency this past year.
That's great news. And I'm pleased to see that people took advantage of the extra installments. Because I know a lot of people have their taxes escrowed, so it didn't really matter. But obviously, there are quite a few people that do take advantage of the installment plan. So that's great news.
Dr. G.
Ms. Stoll actually asked my question regarding if there was increased delinquency, so that was answered. And I would just agree that I think any opportunity that we can offer to have an extension of the installments is important, especially for people on fixed incomes. So yeah, I definitely would want to support that on a more long-term basis beyond this year even. But thank you, Ms. Stoll, answered my question, or asked my question to be answered.
Okay, I don't see any other hands or questions.
Okay, what we can do then is we can have the resolution drafted, and we can have this ready for the May action meeting then. We'll put that on in May. So it'll be 2 parts then, one for the installments and one for the penalty being reduced from 10% to 5% for the second straight year. So thank you for that. I'm sure the community will appreciate that offer from the committee and the board once again. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll look forward to that resolution.
Okay, Dr. Santoro, third time's a charm, right?
Can you hear me?
Ah, we got you.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to have to try to do this through my phone. All right. Okay. Thank you for your patience. I apologize. I think it's something with Zoom. So hopefully this will be kind of quick. There's not a whole lot to really discuss in my budget. The majority of my budget is really spent in salaries. So if we could just go to the next slide, please, Kristen. So this is just a high level overview of some of the responsibilities that I have in the department, which obviously is overseeing the 13 elementary schools, the supervision of principals, providing coaching, being a mentor to all principals, and ensuring that we continue with professional development to enhance their leadership. Another big item is the MTSS process, which is a process we have in place now for 4 years, but it's continuing to make sure that we're implementing with fidelity, and we're making tweaks that we need to make along the way. So it really is into that phase of looking at the fidelity. And then the third piece I listed there was my oversight of K-12 registration, and then also centralized kindergarten registration. I'm the LEA for McKinney-Vento. I do the transfers of attendance at elementary, and then also I'm the point of contact for foster care. If we could go to the next slide, please. So also another big item is PBIS, and I'm really proud to report that 10 out of our 13 elementary schools have been fully trained through the consortium, which is great. And next year we have York Ave, Gwinnett Square, and Walton Farm joining the consortium training. So then that will be all of our 13 schools partaking in PBIS. We have a great partnership with the IU coaches. They do direct coaching within our buildings, with our teams, and with our teachers, which is really a great added feature. We have a district-wide team. We meet 4 times a year. We meet quarterly, and that involves various stakeholders, our partnership with transportation, food services, and then also the social skills curriculum, which is second step that we've been implementing now for 3 years. Next slide, please. So just an overview of, the 13 principals I listed there, folks that are in the department, our registrar, our early learning coordinator, the 2 home and school visitors, my administrative assistant, and the school climate coordinators. Next slide. So as I stated, about 98% of my budget is spent in salaries and benefits. And I listed out all the positions there. My position, you can read the list: the home and school visitors, the district registrar, my assistant, early learning coordinator. We do provide substitute secretaries to assist with centralized registration because it is a high volume, and also in the summer months. I also support nurses to assist us with registration, which is very helpful when they can, look at the immunizations and the medical records firsthand. So I support that in my budget. Intervention for math and reading, transportation, some transportation costs, and also some professional activities for music. Next slide, please. So $356,000 is allocated for intervention, and that's to support tier 2 and tier 3 in both math and reading. So that's across all 13 elementary schools, and we've been doing that for a number of years. Next slide, please. Roughly $48,000 is to support our music professional activities, and that's really to assist our instrumental, orchestra, and chorus teachers to compensate them for any work they do outside of their contractual day, and also their ensemble groups. They may have, a select chorus that meets after school. They may have a jazz group that meets after school, and then naturally to support all the evening concerts that they do. And also, out of that chunk of money there, we support folks who come in to assist us playing the piano for the concerts. Next slide. For transportation, this is really in-house transportation after morning practices for music. If it's band, orchestra, we know that our schools are partnered up. So we have to then, get the students back to their home building. So that's the cost there for that for the year. And also the planetarium trips. All of our schools, each grade level at each building, visit the planetarium twice a year. And then the last slide is just some remaining funds, which is a little bit for mileage, some supplies, books or periodicals, and professional development. And that's my budget in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dr. Santoro. Are there any questions? Dr. G?
I really just have, at a later time, are you, similar to Marjorie, going to present kind of how, and maybe I'm sure you're still working through this, how, because I feel like your budget could be impacted the most in terms of how some of that money could be used in terms of the COVID-19. Is that going to come up at a later time? And I guess that could be you or Mr. Scrocky. But I'm just thinking of books, for example. One way that could possibly use would be the replacement of books that were lost or materials that were not returned over the course of COVID from March. I'm sure that our libraries have many, many thousands of books that have been, I don't know that for sure, but I would think that there have been books that have not been returned because of just the time frame.
Right.
So I'm just wondering what.
Actually, that's an excellent question, Dr. G. I was just speaking with Kristen today and also Dr. Waters that we need to get a meeting on the table to talk about how we can utilize those funds, for the learning loss. And it's not just materials that have been lost, but also looking a little bit more extensively about the academic and I call it the COVID gap that we're going to be seeing from kids that they're going to be experiencing. So we're still in the planning phases of that. So I really want to meet with my curriculum friends to just kind of put a good plan in place and just to come back to the board probably towards the end of the year in June, late May or June. And, we'll share with you our ideas, but that's an excellent question.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other hands. Thank you, Dr. Santoro.
Thank you.
Finally got that working.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Santoro. Why don't we jump around on the agenda since we're talking about some of the federal funding? Why don't we jump to that next item? Mrs. Johnson is going to do another update regarding our federal stimulus money. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And I'll touch upon it when I do the budget update in a little bit, but we do have a significant amount of money in next year's budget for utilization of the federal funding, both supplementing our budget and supplanting planned purchases for the upcoming year. But let's start with Mrs. Johnson to start talking about some of the numbers. Mrs. Johnson, hello.
I'm all a mess today. I apologize. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, so tonight we did want to provide an update on the status of the various federal funding sources we've been awarded to North Penn School District to address the challenges of COVID-19. We had discussed the status of these grants last month, but we wanted to highlight the changes that have occurred since the last presentation. So we have received some positive news. The first being that ESSER 3.0 funding has been finalized for allocation, and North Penn will be receiving just over $9.3 million. And as a reminder, we've kind of touched on this a little bit tonight already. The funding does have a 20% requirement for learning loss mitigation, which will be approximately $1.9 million. We also learned that this grant will be available through September 30th, 2024, which is a year longer than our original understanding. So with this news, we have begun to identify costs for this summer and next school year, which are being allocated to this particular grant to satisfy the learning loss use requirement. And we'll, towards the end of this presentation, we talk about specifically what we're going to be using for each of these grants. The second batch of positive news we received is that the district did receive information from the Montgomery County IU, who is the organization that is administering the Montgomery County grant that we received. And we learned that the deadline, which we were hoping for, had been extended to May 31st, which is great because we did have that Chromebook purchase that was kind of sitting out there in limbo of almost $400,000 that we weren't sure if we were going to be able to charge back against this county grant. Because the original deadline was December 31st, and we were able to confirm that we could request reimbursement for that, which is great. So we did not have to forfeit any of the allocation we received from the county. So that was very positive for us. With the addition of the ESSER 3.0 grant, that brings North Penn's total grant award value to over $17.6 million for the general fund. For extended care, which we talked a little bit about earlier with Marjorie, Ms. Scott, not a lot has changed since our last presentation. However, Ms. Scott has officially submitted our application for the coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations funding. As a reminder, this funding, if it's awarded, it will bring in $120,900 in funding that does not have to be used for reimbursement of expenditures. Instead, this can be used to offset the revenue losses experienced due to reduced enrollment, which, as we saw with Ms. Scott's presentation, that is the reality for our extended care program. We did want to highlight some of the guidelines and principles that the district is using to help identify potential uses for our federal funds. As we're looking to use federal funds, we're remembering that these funds are temporary and will not be available after September 30th, 2024 at the latest, possibly earlier if we utilize them all. When we think about how to use the funds, we're trying to focus on student learning and social emotional needs. We're focused on student needs driven by the response to COVID. We're thinking about how to apply these funds to address the equity gap. We're also considering how technology can be integrated for all learning at all levels. We're also considering needs for safety and security to ensure in-person instruction can be maximized. And finally, we're looking at how to use these funds to cover unexpected expenses or revenue reductions directly resulting from the COVID pandemic. And these principles align with the allowable uses that PDE has outlined for us. So for tonight, we are providing a summary of each grant and the expenditure categories assigned to each grant to clarify how the funds have been used. So for the ESSER and county grants, I just want to highlight that the primary expenditure drivers are increased staff costs, remote learning technology equipment, PPE supplies, and assessment software. For PCCD grants, we're looking at PPE equipment and supplies, assessment and learning management software, and student assistance programming, which will have a mental health component to it. The Special Education COVID-19 Impact Mitigation Grant will be used to expand summer programming for our special education students. And I'd like to note that we still have funding available in ESSER 2.0 of approximately 2.1 million and ESSER 3.0 of 8.37 million. We'll continue to highlight the spending categories for these grants as we move forward and identify costs that we're going to charge against each of these grants. I do want to highlight that you may notice that some of the grants are covering similar expenditures. So you'll see PPE supplies in multiple grants. And this is occurring to allow the district to ensure no funding is unspent. With different deadlines of each of the grants, we're finding the need to split costs across multiple grants to allow the funding to be used within the allowable timeframe. So I do want to highlight that for next school year, at this time, we have a little over $3.5 million allocated for ESSER 1, 2, and 3. We're still obviously working through that and trying to identify any additional costs that might be able to be moved over. But at this time, we have identified 3.5 million, just slightly over. If there's any question about the spending categories or specifically what's in the 21-22 budget, I'd be happy to address that at this time.
Ms. Wesley.
Thanks, Mr. Fusco. Ms. Johnson, regarding the principals, particularly number 2, and I don't know if tonight's night, but I would like to understand in that slide for number 2, what the monies would actually be spent on. I mean, the ones that we just went through are very tangible, the PPE, the Chromebooks, things like that, but exactly what analysis or data would be utilized to determine what the prioritization of the skill sets that are needed. And then additionally, is it for elementary, middle school, or high school at some point? That would be my request.
I do have a little bit of information about what we've allocated thus far. What has been allocated to ESSER 3 is specifically for learning loss. So we are looking at an expansion of the Renaissance assessment software, which will cover elementary and middle school grade levels. And that's to try and gauge where the students are at and identify where the learning loss is really happening so that we can really start to craft our approach for addressing that learning loss in a more direct way. We also are looking at adding learning coaches and a reading specialist for next year's budget. So those will be funded from the ESSER. So at this time, those are the definitives that are in the budget for learning loss, but we're fully anticipating that we're going to have more. And just a reminder, 20% is the minimum. So we could use 80% for learning loss if we really want to. But at this time, those are the identified costs in ESSER 3 specifically for learning loss.
Okay, thanks. And one more question. Is there a timeline developed yet for determining or completing the assessment and then determining the prioritization? Is it before the start of the school year in September or later at some point?
I just want to make sure I understand. Are you talking the assessment of the students or the assessment of what to charge?
The assessment of the students.
Okay. I'm not sure the exact scheduling for the assessment of the students. I don't know if Dr. Santor is still on and would be able to maybe speak to that. I am not aware of the exact timeline of that.
I understand, that's fair. She's not, then maybe at some point we could discuss what that time looks like for completion of the assessments. I would appreciate that, thanks.
Absolutely. I mean, I can say that the assessment software, we had 1 year that actually we already have paid for, and we're getting 3 more years of it. So I do feel that it's going to be an ongoing process, but when that initial assessment is going to take place, we can look into that for you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mrs. Stoll.
So yeah, I just want to make sure I got my math right. You said that there's about 2 million left on ESSERS 2 and 8.37 million left in ESSERS 3. So about $10.5 million left.
That's correct.
But $3.5 million is allocated. Is that for
3.5 between ESSER 1, 2, and 3? We have about 750,000 in ESSER 1 right
okay.
now.
Gotcha. So there's about $6.5 million left to allocate that has to be used by 2024.
We have 2.1 left on ESSER 2 and 8.37. So we have a little over 10 million left.
Oh, okay. Because that's what. Okay, gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Dr. Lewis Campbell.
Yes, Ms. Johnson. I wanted to know, I don't recall you saying this, but in ESSER 3, will that learning loss, would that have any impact on what is planned for this summer in terms of summer school for students?
Yes, so that is additional costs that we're anticipating are going to end up being charged to ESSER 3. We don't have the estimation of what those costs will be yet. There is the Special Education COVID-19 Impact Mitigation Grant that is specifically for special education students, and that will be occurring this summer because those funds expire September 30th of 2021. So definitely for special education, we know that we're going to have at least 151,000 for that programming. They're still developing and refining exactly what those summer programs are going to look like, but we are fully anticipating that there are going to be additional costs which we need to add in for ESSER 3 that are going to be related to learning loss and addressing that with summer programming.
Okay, so that means the cost would be on us and not on the parents?
I believe there's something on the agenda for Thursday to talk about how that will be funded, but we could use ESSER funding, absolutely.
Spoiler alert, there may be a motion by Mr. Resch coming on Thursday. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I see Mr. McBain.
Thank you, Mr. Fusco. I just want to know, we're starting to ask Ms. Johnson a lot of educational questions about when we're going to know the status of our students and things like that. And I'm very happy that we're thinking along those lines so that we can be prepared when that time comes. And I have full trust in this team to be able to communicate with parents and students to find out what exactly we need to do. So thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for finding these little places and little grants here and there just to make sure that our taxpayers' money is getting the most bang for their buck, and we're using every resource we can to take care of this community. So keep up the great work. Thank you so much.
And this is such a great report, and Kristen did an awesome job with it. So perhaps we have this scheduled for a quarterly review. We just continue to bring this back and update the board so you're apprised of the status with the funding. I think it's also important to note at this point in time, especially considering the board's support of charter school reform last year, or last month, I should say. It's important to note that we are very grateful at North Penn to be receiving $17.6 million in federal stimulus money. But the note here is that the cyber schools in Pennsylvania collectively are going to receive $211.7 million in federal money as well. In fact, one charter school, Commonwealth Charter School, it's a cyber school, they're receiving $41 million in ESSER 3 funding, $41 million in ESSER 3 funding. And they have about 9,000 or 10,000 students. We have 13,000 at North Penn, and we're receiving 17.6 between ESSER 1, 2, and 3. Commonwealth Charter Academy is receiving almost $57 million in total between ESSER 1, 2, and 3. So this money is being distributed by the federal government based on Title I allocations. And what they utilized were the student counts this fiscal year. So students that may have left the traditional brick and mortar public schools over to the charter schools, they got included in the counts and subsequently in the funding for ESSER 1, 2, and 3 for the cyber schools. So it's kind of interesting, I believe, because cyber schools were already involved with remote learning. To a large degree, they don't have a physical presence. So I'm not sure how they're spending the PPE, money on PPE. I'm not sure what they needed to do with remote learning. They were doing it already. But $211 million collectively is going to the Pennsylvania cyber schools as part of the federal stimulus funding. So again, that's beyond the scope of what the board passed a resolution for last month with charter school reform, but nonetheless, it's important to note the amount of money that's being distributed from the federal government to organizations that were already in an online format prior to the pandemic. I find it rather interesting.
Mr. Scrocky, is that the 14 cyber charter schools?
Yes, in Pennsylvania, right, 211.7 to the cyber schools, 1.1 billion is the total for all charter schools. So the breakdown is 211 million for the cybers and 955,000 for the brick and mortars. So a total of 1.1 billion collectively for all the charter schools. But I think that the cyber schools is a more interesting story, since obviously they're already in a virtual format. They were prior to the pandemic. So a lot of this funding is to help facilitate remote learning, but cybers were already in a remote learning format paid for by the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. So that's why it's just puzzling to me that the cybers would have been included with this. But again, it was based on the Title I allocation. So certainly not their fault, but it's just really interesting. So perhaps another item for advocacy with your local legislator, even at the federal level, to question why cyber schools were included in this massive allocation. So as we discussed when we made the charter school presentation last month, there were several reports that the cyber schools were using this federal money on gift cards for parents and cell phones for families. So I would suspect with that massive amount that was included in ESSER 3, more families will be receiving iPhones and gift cards as a result of the federal stimulus money.
Mr. Scrocky, and I don't ask this ironically, and not because I think we should be spending it on it, but are we able to spend this money on gift cards and cell phones as well and somehow make a claim that that's related to our COVID-related expenditures?
Well, let me put it this way, Mr. Fusco, that won't happen under my watch, because for the life of me, I don't know how you could argue that a gift card, a Target gift card for a family or a cell phone complies with the established regulations. I don't see even a gray area, but
I guess to my point is they are held to the same standards as we are in terms of how to spend this money, correct? So, I mean, is it just that there's gray area in the law? I know that there's been a lot of questions from my fellow board members about, where else can we find avenues to make use of this money? And, the continued response is it's very targeted. And somehow it doesn't seem to apply to these cyber charters. And it's very frustrating for those of us who are operating buildings, brick and mortar buildings that people go into and therefore need PPE, right? That had students not attend and go to other programs and have learning loss, as you suggested, whereas the charter schools, it was pretty much business as usual. In fact, it was quite a boost to their business and their bottom line from pulling enrollment. And now with this additional funding, it's seeming almost slush-like.
Mr. Fusco, to answer your question, I don't have an answer. For the life of me, I have no idea how you can purchase a gift card for a family and say that complies with the guidelines established through the ESSER funding.
Dr. Lewis Campbell, is your hand up or did you just forget to lower it?
No, I'll lower it.
Okay, I just want to make sure you have your opportunity. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Excellent report as usual, and we will bring this report back. We'll just plan on this on a quarterly basis to keep you updated. Okay, next item we're going to move on to are the tax collector audits. We do have 9 elected tax collectors that serve North Penn School District, 7 in Montgomery County, 2 in Bucks County. And every year we select 2 or 3 tax collectors for an audit. This year we selected Toa-Menson Township and Upper Gwinnett Township. We typically do it on a rotating basis. If a tax collector is leaving office, we always target those to make sure we have an audit in the last year that the collector was collecting. But this year it was Upper Gwinnett and Toa-Menson Township. So the audit was conducted by our new auditing firm, Zellenkoff Axelrod. And just to give you a quick background of what they do for the audit, they actually take a look at 60 transactions and they trace those transactions. They look at the deposits, they take a look at the real estate tax duplicate, they take a look at the timeliness of the deposits, try to make sure everything ties in and everything is accurate. So I'm pleased to report for both the tax collectors at Toa-Menson Township and Upper Gwinnett, there were no issues whatsoever. Zellenkoff Axelrod was able to reconcile the amount that was turned over for delinquent collections, so there were no issues there. And let's see, at Upper Gwinnett for that particular year, now this is for the calendar year 2019, Upper Gwinnett collected 98% of the total tax levy and Toa-Menson collected 97%, both healthy collection rates. So we are pleased with the efforts of those 2 tax collectors and appreciate their cooperation during the audit process, and both received clean bills of health from the auditor. Any questions on the tax collector audits? And Mrs. Stoll, while we were listening to Dr. Santoro's presentation, I did take a quick look at the delinquency question that you asked about earlier. And we actually saw a reduction in our delinquencies this year of 8% is the precise number. So the question was, did we see an uptick in delinquencies with the downturn in the economy? No, we actually saw a reduction of 8% in our delinquencies in calendar year 2020. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, pretty substantial.
Do you know, I'm just curious, is that sort of common across other districts in the county? Is that maybe attributable partly to some of the COVID relief related to housing and rental and whatnot, or is that specific to our community?
I've been hearing throughout the state and talking to colleagues throughout the state, it's pretty much regional. So depending on the region of the state, some did see reductions in the amount collected and an increase in delinquencies. In this particular region in Southeast Pennsylvania, though, I think most districts are very similar to North Penn. I think we're all very surprised by the level of earned income tax collection, real estate tax collection. I think it surprised quite a few people that were really planning for a catastrophic fiscal year. That certainly didn't come to fruition.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to a very brief budget update, knowing that, again, next week we're going to get into a deep dive, probably at least an hour-long discussion in and of itself. I thought it was important tonight to provide an update in terms of the status of the budget, where we stand today, April 13th. Just a quick timeline on where we're at right now, and a reminder that back in December, the board did pass a resolution not to exceed the Act 1 index. The Act 1 index for the upcoming fiscal year is 3%. So what that allowed administration to do at that point in time was to follow the budget calendar that was in place prior to Act 1, which means that the proposed final budget is up for consideration in May and the final budget in June. So a lot of our work on the budget kind of got pushed back compared to the previous years when we had a much more accelerated timeline. So next Wednesday night, we do have a special finance committee meeting. I hope you're able to attend. We are going to get into a deeper dive of the budget. At that point in time, we will be asking for some board direction on a tax rate for next year, whether that's 0 or 3 or somewhere in between. We'll be asking for direction because we will plan on populating our budget in preparation then for the May 11th meeting. And that next meeting is the adoption of the proposed final budget. We have a finance committee meeting that night at 6 o'clock on May 11th, and then at 7 o'clock up for consideration will be the adoption of the proposed final budget. And then June 17th, we are slated then for the final budget adoption. And then our budget will start, our new budget for 21-22 fiscal year will start on July 1. So again, the Act 1 index is 3%. The board elected not to file for any exceptions this year, so that 3% is the upper limit. In our discussion tonight, as we do typically at this stage of the budget process, the numbers you'll see tonight are assuming a 0% tax increase. So when we talk about our deficit, there's no tax increase baked into these numbers. So where we are right now, just a very quick snapshot, we are at an $11.5 million budget deficit right now. And that means that we are planning on spending more money than we are bringing in next fiscal year. That's how a deficit arises, when you spend more money than what you bring in. It was interesting. I went back and looked at a May presentation from last year, and we were pretty much right at the exact same spot last year, $11.5 million. Pretty interesting. So just for curiosity purposes, what would it take if we said, okay, we're not going to make any tax cuts or expenditure cuts, I should say. We're not going to bring any additional revenue. Our budget is our budget. What would it take to balance the budget simply with the tax increase? Again, just for curiosity, it's 6.07%, although we are not permitted to go higher than 3%, just for a point of reference. So our revenues for the upcoming year are scheduled to be $276 million. Our expenditures, $287.5 million. That leaves us with the $11.5 million budget deficit. So who would think you would be excited about an $11.5 million deficit? But compared to our initial draft of the budget back in January, we actually are excited. We were able to bridge $4 million of that deficit, largely funded through the federal relief funds that Mrs. Johnson just spoke about. And she mentioned that about $3.5 million is already baked into next year's budget through supplementing and supplanting. So that helped us get that budget gap from 15.5 million down to 11.5 million. So we are very thankful for the use of that federal money. And it's also important to note with the timelines with the federal money, we certainly aren't planning on spending all that money in one fiscal year. We have through the September of 2024 to spend that money. So that actually is in the 24-25 fiscal year. So our plan for the federal expenditures will actually be over a multi-year period to draw that money down. So a quick comparison to how our current budget as it stands today compares to last year. Our revenues we're projecting will increase by $4.3 million. That's about a 1.6% increase. And our expenditures are up 3.41%. So our final budget for the 2021 year, the one that was enacted by the board, we had a $6.4 million budget deficit. That was the budget enacted. Right now, we're at an $11.5 million deficit. Now, even though we had a $6.4 million budget deficit, I will tell you that our spending is coming in much less than budgeted, and our revenues are coming in higher than budgeted. So at this point in time, we're not expecting to use fund balance to the tune of $6.4 million. It'll be a number much less than that. We have projections that we included in one of the monthly financial reports. So we are expecting a nice variance in that regard, but it's still not going to be to a break-even level. So we are still anticipating utilizing some fund balance in the current fiscal year, but certainly not as bad as the $6.4 million budget that was approved at the beginning of the year. I just want to give a quick reminder of our current fund balance because this is an important piece of the equation when we talk about the budget. We have nearly $38 million in total fund balance. The unassigned piece that could be used for any purpose whatsoever that has an 8% limit by law. Our unassigned fund balance is $18.1 million. That's currently 6.5% of the total budget. That's a very nice reserve. So each year we put together a hypothetical budget scenario just to kind of frame perspective. When you look at that $11.5 million deficit, it is pretty staggering. But just throwing in a couple assumptions. Again, these aren't recommendations at this point. They're just for point of clarity and for point of discussion. To show you what an Act 1 increase of 3% would mean, that would generate nearly $5.7 million. Per policy, we have $1.5 million included in the budget for budgetary reserve. So if we have no unplanned expenditures at the end of the year, that $1.5 million would basically flow back to the fund balance at the end of the year. We are expecting about $800,000 worth of additional retirements between now and June. We do have a number of retirements that are already included in the budget. We do have new positions included in the budget, some funded by the ESSER funding, some funded by the general fund. Also, each year we do expect to have a nice surprise at the end of the year of around 0.5%. That's always our target. We plan to underspend our budget by 0.5%, and we hope to bring in 0.5% in additional revenue. So that means that would add $2.8 million to the budget. So when you mix all that into the pot at the end of the year, even with a starting point of minus 11.5 million, that would bring our projected ending deficit at the end of the fiscal year under $1 million, meaning that $714,000 would be utilized from fund balance. It could be more or it could be less. A lot depends on those variances and spending throughout the year, but that would be our best projection at this point in time. We are planning on continuing to refine the budget because there's still a number of unknowns. The state has not passed its budget, and we are planning a 0% increase in our budget for basic ed funding and special education funding. Despite the governor's proposal that would actually bring in an additional $8.4 million to the North Penn budget in basic ed funding. By all accounts, that proposal by the governor is dead on arrival. So we did not include any of that additional funding that would flow through the fair funding formula in our budget. So we have a 0% increase in for basic ed, a 0% increase for special ed. Hey, if we get surprised and the state passes the budget in May and there's an increase, we will definitely include that in the budget. A couple of items we are going to revisit will have another positive impact on the budget. Our earned income tax is actually about 5% ahead of where it was last year at this time. So we are going to revisit our projections for earned income tax, which will generate additional revenue. And it's important to note too, the realty transfer tax, property selling in North Penn, has been completely off the charts the past 3 months. So we're going to revisit our realty transfer tax projection as well. That will result in increased revenue, which will further reduce that deficit. And there's a number of other items that we are looking at as part of the budget refinement process. You know, the one area that's still concerning to us is the amount that we have in for the charter school increase for next year. That's $1.5 million. That's a 50% increase in our budget. So we are assuming some of the students that left North Penn this year for cyber schools will return. We included an assumption that 25% of those students will return to the North Penn schools. Even with that assumption, though, we are still facing a $1.5 million increase in our charter school expenditure line items for next year. So if more information comes forward and more students return to North Penn, we can also refine that figure for the coming year. Moving on to the next slide.
Excuse me, Mr. Scott.
Mr. Casa had a question, sorry.
The budget scenario reminds me, having gone through this each year, but also a reminder to ourselves in this committee, but anyone else who might be seeing this for the first time from the community. Just want to make sure I have some of my facts straight. When we've gone through this process before, and I appreciate the conservative approach, because I actually commend you and the team, Mr. Scirocchi, that I remember my first budget on the board, you were looking for 1%, and you would hit that mark in the variance, and the goal was to get to 0.5%. And I know that's part of, you know, the overall strategy, which has us, you know, with an elite Moody's bond rating, because you're so good with the projections. Now, in the prior 2 years, I believe we had a budget deficit projected, but at the end, by the end of the fiscal year, am I correct that we actually had a small surplus each of the last 2 years?
Well, I have to explain it. I can't give a direct answer. Let me explain this. First off, we have used a minimal amount of fund balance the past couple of years, but we also need to keep in mind that the board elected to do a capital reserve transfer to fund our 10-year capital plan as part of that. So when that capital reserve transfer is made, that shows as an expenditure in the general fund. So were it not for those capital reserve transfers, we actually would have added to the fund balance. But the board was prudent in examining the 10-year plan, prioritizing the safety issues related to the 10-year plan, and was wise to transfer money to the capital reserve fund to address the most pressing projects that are on our lengthy list. So even with those transfers of several $1 million, there was only a minimal amount of fund balance that's been used over the last several years.
Thank you for that clarification. And yeah, certainly, I mean, and that's a 10-year plan. We weren't making those budget transfers before for capital, and that's a 10-year plan with probably well over $150 million in expenditures. So it's a start. Just two other questions. The special education funding, though it's dead on arrival and we might sometimes get an uptick, I believe that the average over the last few years has far outpaced our ability to raise revenue on our own or whatever support we receive. I look at that as an unfunded mandate. Is the average somewhere around 7 or 8% in the increase each year from North Penn, while we only receive about 6%? Is that the exact number?
We went back and did, Mrs. Johnson actually did a deep dive on the special ed funding over the last 10 years. And Mrs. Johnson, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the 10-year average, our spending, she's going to bring it up. She is so good. I think it was around 6%, our 10-year historical spending on special education, but we had a number of years in there where there was a 0% increase in the special education funding. So our deficit continues to grow year after year with the special education funding. I believe she has a chart in there too, showing the disparity between the special ed funding and the special ed spending. Can you blow that up a little bit, Kristen? And do you want to talk to this since you put this chart together?
Sorry, everything's all over tonight. Yeah, so for our 10-year change, we are at 45%, but up here we have the year-by-year average increase. So you can see that we've been, 7, 8, 5, 4%, and that is above our Act 1. But I think this really drives home the point of where's the shortfall here. This is what the state's giving us, and this is what we're spending. And that gap is growing every year.
Thank you for having those charts. Very quick draw. And this is what for the community, this is just special education funding that's an unfunded mandate. At best, if this board decided to go with 3%, we're trying to outrun this. You add on top of that unfunded safe schools mandates. These are things that the community has to foot the bill on our own because Harrisburg won't help. And that was my last point. Mr. Scrocki, is it, if we had the reasonable, fair, and equitable formula, of which now I believe we only get about 11% of our funds from the state, but if that actually went forward and Harrisburg for the first time in eons would look for equitable funding across Pennsylvania, North Penn would automatically see $9 million, is it, into our budget each year?
We receive right now about $11 million in basic ed funding. If 100% of the state funding for basic ed flowed through the fair funding formula instead of the existing 11%, if 100% flowed through, we would receive next year alone an additional $8.4 million in funding. So that's really important because take a look at that budget deficit and then take a look at some of the other scenarios. That eliminates our deficit, completely eliminates. We're not talking about, that Act 1 increase 3%, that's not on the chart. We're not talking about that. That fully funds the school district, and it's certainly more equitable. And our superintendent, Dr. Dietrich, is actually in about 25 minutes, will be making a presentation with some local legislators just talking about the fair funding formula, how important it is for that to be driven home to the community, the impact that has or would have on the North Penn School District. So in essence, another way of putting it, we've been shortchanged over the years. Our community has been shortchanged with state funding because we are using an outdated, inequitable formula. Other districts have benefited. North Penn has been subsidizing other districts that have received too much in funding. That's why it's imperative that that fair funding formula move forward.
Thank you for those numbers. There's so many that we go over year after year and over the course of many meetings. Maybe those in the audience who've been sitting through that for a while will recall. But for the budget hawks, which we all are, it's why we have the 5th lowest tax rate out of the 21 districts in Montgomery County in this elite Moody's bond rating. I challenge anyone looking at this budget to tell us where we're going to cut in special ed or safe schools or climate coordinators. We have a transparent, very accurate budget process, and the community needs to be aware of this before jumping to conclusions. So thank you for allowing us to be able to have such a high-level discussion, Mr. Scrocki.
You're welcome. And you were reading my mind because my next slide was about putting the tax rate into perspective. Believe me, no one likes real estate taxes. It's not an equitable way of taxation, but it is what we have to deal with. So I think it's always important to put things in perspective relative to our peer districts in our particular region. It's difficult to compare Southeast Pennsylvania and Montgomery County to other counties, but in our county, we are the 5th lowest, as Mr. Casa just mentioned. But not only are we the 5th lowest, we are 22% below the county average. So when you look at the high achieving school district that we have, with the high student achievement as measured by standardized testing, which is far superior to the charter schools that we had talked about before. When you look at that return on investment for the community, it certainly makes it a very desirable community in which to live. So our next steps for the budget tonight was just meant to be a precursor for some of the in-depth discussion we'll have next week. So please, if you can, attend next week. We will get into a lot of the details. We'll get into the specific factors that are driving the budget. We'll talk more about the federal funding. We will be asking again for direction on the tax rate for the upcoming year. And we still plan on refining the budget all the way up through the June adoption. But any kind of major changes, we'll probably have them pretty much accounted for by the proposed final budget in May. But that's basically where we're at with the budget. I thought it was important just to give you a precursor and some insight in some of our discussions that we'll be having next Wednesday. And we'll see you then for more detail.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Scirocchi.
And Mr. Fusco, finally, before we go into the financial reports, we do have our student representative with us. Casey, welcome. Would you like to give an update to the Finance Committee?
Hello.
Hi, Casey. We hear you.
Hi. How are you?
Very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. So I did talk to Mr. Berger about this a little while ago, and one question he wanted me to ask was about some people had asked him about the district policy for clubs using GoFundMe. I don't know if you guys have ever talked about that, but he said he never really knew the answer for fundraising. And he was like, why don't you ask the committee and see what they said about that? So I don't know if any of you guys have an answer to what your policy is on just students using that.
I'm not sure if this is a Mr. Scirocchi question or
Yeah.
a Dr. Bauer question.
Yeah,
Not a
Dr.
Mr.
Bauer.
Fusco question. So
I don't know the answer to that, what the policy, if it even addresses GoFundMe or not.
I don't believe there's a policy specifically that addresses GoFundMe. That would be, I'm not sure what the practice has been or if we have rules in place about that. Dr. Bauer, is there any information you can provide to that?
No, I agree with Mr. Scirocchi. I don't believe it's addressed overtly in the policy. I do know that there have been groups that have tried, and in particular, they're booster clubs and 501c3s that are not, under our umbrella. But for example, I think the thespians have. But again, from a financial standpoint, that's a separate entity. Mr. Scirocchi or Mrs. Johnson, I can't think of a time where we actually used it with a school district club, not a parent booster club.
Correct. I don't recall a situation, Dr. Bauer.
I do think it brings, attention to, as we review policies and we look at, all of our policies, that's one that we may need to modernize, and GoFundMe is one of those vehicles, but there are other ways of crowdsourcing or, whatever those terms are nowadays to be able to ask for money. And it's something you need to be careful with. But I think we could modernize our policy as we get to that one.
Yeah, I do believe, great point, Dr. Dietrich. I do believe the business policies are the item up next. So Mr. Scirocchi and Mrs. Johnson, get ready to hang out with Mr. Fusco and I quite a bit. But those policies are up for review in the next batch.
We can't wait.
I can tell.
Hey, and Dr. Dietrich, kudos to the millennial cred that you get for knowing crowdsourcing. Good work. So we'll follow up on that, Casey. We'll absolutely follow up on that one.
Casey, anything else?
I think that's it. Other than that, we haven't really been meeting in student government a lot recently just because there hasn't been much to do. But I know we are planning I think it's a volleyball tournament, and we want to whoever wins that, we want to donate it to any charity of the winner's choice. That's something that we're really excited for, because we were thinking about what the money could go towards, but a lot of the advisors said that we don't really need it necessarily. So I think we're going to try and donate that to a charity. But other than that, I think that's pretty much it.
Well, great. Thank you, Casey.
Okay, Mr. Fusco, just a couple comments on the financial reports. I alluded to earlier, this fiscal year, we did start the year with a $6.4 million budget deficit. At this point in time, we are expecting an approximate $4.7 million positive variance. So again, that gets us close to breaking even, but still utilizing some fund balance. And that $4.7 million positive variance does include and anticipate a $1.25 million transfer to the extended care fund. So that's already included in that total. I also want to make a comment, an update on the right to know request. This is a monthly report that we share with the board. We have now received a record-breaking total this fiscal year of 85 right to know requests, which is staggering. It's 52% higher than last year, and last year was an all-time record high. I do want to let you know about two recent right to know requests that we received. These were requests for specific information in electronic format, specifically in email messages. And after we did an exhaustive search on our email servers, and after we deduplicated emails that were the same email but just sent to multiple people, this one particular right to know request resulted in 2,616 emails or 11,377 pages of documents. So what happens next now that we've identified those documents? The right to know officer, yours truly, needs to read 11,377 pages of material to determine two things. One, is that particular email responsive to the right to know request? And secondly, is there any personal or other information that's included in that email that would be subject to redaction? That's the one request for email. The second one produced 7,253 emails or 19,301 pages. So between the two right to know requests that were received, I need to read 30,000 pages worth of information before we can reply to the right to know request as required by law. So we did reach out to the two requesters and ask for an additional 30-day extension because there's just not bandwidth right now to be able to read 30,000 pages worth of emails to respond to these right to know requests. So I think it's important for the board to know, though, the amount of time that's required. Not only do I need to read the emails as your right to know officer, but our solicitor will be reviewing them with me as well. And then we have a meeting of the minds to ultimately determine which records are responsive to the request. So it'll be several $1,000s in legal expenses as a result of this as well, none of which is eligible to be billed back to the requester. So I think it's really important when we look at use of taxpayer money, it's important for the committee and the community to know the impact that these right to know requests have on the school district, financially, from a financial perspective, and from a staffing perspective.
Thank you for that information, Mr. Scrocky. I'm sorry that you have to read so many emails. I think it is a complete and utter waste of your time as well as taxpayer money. And I'm sorry for that. You have lots of other things to do.
That concludes my my reports. And just a reminder again, all the financial reports include an executive summary and executive content. Try to provide a high level information regarding each report. So if you have any questions now or at a future meeting, please let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Scrocky. All right, we're going to move along on the agenda then, and we are up to our second opportunity for public comment. Mr. Gilmer, is there anyone in the audience with their hand raised?
I'll just remind to hit the hand at the bottom. I know a couple of hands came up in the course of the presentation and they went down, but first one up is Mr. Lanier. I've enabled your microphone. If you could state your name and address, you can begin your comments.
Jason Lanier, 100 Oak Drive. Had a couple questions, and maybe I need to direct them to the specific person. I didn't catch who did the presentation on the extended school care. Don't necessarily have a problem with that. I do have a question in terms of why there was so much money spent while we were in shutdown, meaning we were at $1 million surplus in that account, I believe they said, and it's at a deficit currently. Seems like a lot of expenditures when there was a shutdown. Maybe I don't know something. Other question I would have is how long do you anticipate having to operate the extended school program before the reimbursement of what is going to be given as sort of a bridge loan so that they can maintain their business? That is, how long is it going to take to recoup those costs? And do they really expect to be able to recoup those costs in short order? I think the presenter said something like 600 students maybe over the summer. Last question on that topic is why the 40 square feet per student? Not sure I fully understand. So those are very specific questions, and maybe I can get some idea of whom I should actually direct those to. Regarding Kristen Johnson's presentation, she mentioned some of the uses of expenditures. One of them listed was number 4 was solve for equity gap. I don't know what the equity gap is, and I would like some definition on that. If in how do you ever fund something like that? And just as in general note, Mr. Strachey mentioned how there's all these right to knows. I have not filed any right to knows. I realize that that's a big expenditure of effort on his part. I can guess as to what these are about, and it's probably along the lines of why some of these decisions were made by the school board. Some of the things that I've been bringing up in terms of the COVID related decisions on shutdown, why were these things suddenly changed in terms of having options to not having options, and being forced into all online, or or partial reopening. It isn't. I mean, as much as you guys want to say that it was all on the books and it was open, it was not. It was not. There's not a clear understanding as to why that happened. And my last point would be also regarding the budget somewhat. I don't think it would be advisable to raise taxes on anybody, especially in our current situation. We're not open. You guys haven't been able to fully articulate as to why we are moving so slow on opening. And you're only going to throw salt into the wound in terms of my feeling as how a lot of the constituency here feels. Thank you.
To Mr. Lanier's, just his first question in terms of who he could address his questions to. Obviously, Margie Scott was the presenter. Is there anybody else that you could recommend he reach out to, maybe via email?
So, Mr. Lanier, feel free to email me. This is Mr. Scrocky. My email is on the board website, district website. Feel free to email me. I'll be happy to answer your questions about the financial piece. I can answer those. I can't answer the 40 square feet piece that Ms. Scott would need to address, but I can walk you through what the plan is for the repayment of that bridge loan, as you termed it.
Thank you. Any other public comment, Mr. Orr?
Just looking to make sure I see the hands. This would be the time to raise your hand if you're doing it, if you're making any comments. Go ahead.
Vice President Fusco, may I ask a question, please?
Absolutely.
So Dr. Dietrich, I'm just confused, and maybe we could have a follow-up with Mr. Lanier through email. Are our schools open right now?
Yes, so any student who is requesting to be in, whether it's 5 days for a 5-day attendance pattern, or anybody who would request to stay in hybrid, that being 2 days some weeks and 3 other weeks, has been accommodated. So they're all here who want to be here. There are some students that continue to be in remote learning, and that number has stayed fairly consistent, and around that 26-28%. But anybody who wants to come in, we've been able to accommodate those students.
Thanks for clearing up any confusion for Mr. Lanier.
Can I also make a comment? Is Mr. Lanier talking about the payments that had to be made in the springtime? Were we required by the state law to pay everybody? I think that's
so, Mrs. Stahl. I think that's where the most precipitous loss for the extended care program occurred in the spring, when we were required by law under Act 13 to continue to pay our employees, and they received benefits. In essence, they received them for the second half of March, all of April, all of May, all of June, and there was zero revenue coming in at that point in time.
And again, we were required to do it.
Okay. Next and up for public comment.
Mr. Wilcox is up next. I've enabled your microphone, so you're ready to begin. State your name and address and begin your comments, please.
Hello again, Owen Wilcox, 32 East School Street. Just want to comment real quick on the last thing that was kind of discussed is the right to know. As someone who's used right to know both with North Penn and different municipalities, I mean, I definitely a big supporter of the law and the access it provides to people. I know municipalities and the school district has come a long way in transparency and trying to make a lot of information available. I just I guess I just want to comment and voice my support for the process. And I guess a lot of the requests coming in are for emails and stuff, or because of the past year and all the decisions that are made. And I know I even made a request early on and kind of dropped it once I knew how voluminous it was, because I wasn't really looking, as a gotcha per se. I just really wanted more information that I think was being provided. But again, just a general comment in support of that process, because I think it is important to members of the public who wish to seek more information from the district to be able to access that. So again, thank you.
Okay, I do not see any other hands up at this time. Hold on. Late arrival here. Mr. Patchell has raised his hand. Mr. Patchell, when you're ready to begin, you can open your mic and begin your comments, please.
Thank you very much. I've been waiting a long time. This has been a very interesting conversation. So many topics being brought to the public. Firstly, the right to know. It's a law. And I don't really care if it's 11,000 words, 1,000,000 words, you have to do it. I put a lot of right to know in. I'm getting used to see that word denied. We have no record. Okay, we can do this. I've met with people that are running against the people that are on the board now. I'm telling you that there's going to be a big change. In my group, the senior citizens, over 20,000 people are retired. They're sick and tired of spending all this money. You know what? 3%, 2%, 1%. If you raise these taxes, we are going to throw every one of you out. I don't see what you don't understand. Do you understand what you have to do? You have to do what the public tells you. Stop on this unilateral, structural, whatever it is. Oh, yeah, all this stuff. You get your money from the public. You get your money from businesses. You get your wherewithal from, and you know what? You listen to these crazy builders, these people that have ideas, and you know what? The birth rate is declining. School population is declining. You're spending millions of dollars, $38 million or whatever it was, $30 million on a stadium and on NAP. Yeah, we got two paddleboard ponds. You need to stop spending money. What don't you understand? The new people that are waiting to take your place will take a very comprehensive look at expenditures. And I'm telling you, this available fund balance, it used to be 43 million. And now it's dropped by 6 million. Doesn't sound like very much. There was a warning sound a year or two ago. Oh, if we fall below 30, we're going to be really in bad trouble. You know what? You're going to have so many people deciding not to come back to this district. I don't know what you're going to do. And ultimately, Harrisburg could say, you know what? You're not going to have property taxes anymore. We're going to send you 261 million. Make it work. This is what's going to happen. Because you know what? The people in the center part of the state and the upper tier counties, you know what they think North Penn School District is? We could care less what you people are doing. Do you think they have all these things? No, they just ignore it. You're out here fighting yourself. It's not going to work. I'm telling you, all of you are going to be voted out, at least Mr. Costa and Mr. Roush. I want to thank you for your service. But I'm telling you, your stay has been a very long time. You're going to be voted out, and then there'll be a change. Thank you.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. The official Bill Patchell endorsement has been made. All right. Thank you very much. All right. We're going to move on because I don't see any other hands.
If there are no more hands, I will close public comment.
Okay. Can we move to 8, summary of items recommended for work session? Mr. Skoracki.
Thank you, Mr. Fusco. So we have 3 items slated for the agenda on Thursday night, our action meeting. We have the extended care program tuition rates for 21-22, the summer camp rates. We have budget transfers, and we have the Delta Dental Administrative Agreement. For the May meeting, we will have the 6 installments and the penalty from 10 to 5%. We'll have that resolution in May. Those would be the 4 items, 3 for Thursday, 1 for next month.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Our next meeting date is going to be April 21st at 6 o'clock. And then we have another meeting on May 11th at 6 o'clock. And then we have another meeting on May 18th at 6 o'clock. So to be continued. Are there any other comments before motion to adjourn? All right. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis Campbell. We are adjourned at 1 minute before 8 o'clock. There it is. All right. Well done, folks. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scrocky. Well done.
Good night, everybody.
Kristen, thank you, Mr. Scrocky.
Thank you. See ya.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmer.
Just waiting for you, Tina.
Okay.